The sky above Earth fractured. It began as a shimmer, an eerie distortion of the stars, then 1,000 warships materialized in orbit. Monstrous vessels, their hulls bristling with weapons capable of leveling continents, cast shadows over the planet. The Zalvor had arrived. Dr. Elias Carter stood in Lunar Base's control center, his hands clenched behind his back. He had known this moment would come. The Galactic Imperator had made his demands clear: surrender or be annihilated. Humanity had chosen either. A transmission echoed through the control room. The Imperator's voice, thick with contempt, slithered through the speakers. Humans! Your time is over. Kneel, and we may grant you mercy. Silence followed. Across the room, Captain Sarah Reeves, liaison to Earth's Defense Council, exhaled sharply. They really think we're going to roll over? Elias turned to the main display. Earth's defense fleet, a mere 50 ships against the Empire's thousands, was forming a blockade. Brave but futile. He knew the truth: the battle was already lost. The first strike came without warning. A massive energy lance fired from the lead Zalvor dreadnought. The beam carved through space, striking a human cruiser. The ship disintegrated in a violent burst, a silent explosion in the void. All channels, incoming transmission. A technician called out. The screen flickered, revealing the face of Admiral Lawrence Halloway, leader of Earth's defense forces. His expression was grim. We're outgunned, he said. They're cutting through us like paper. If you have any miracles, Carter, now's the time. Elias's throat tightened. He glanced at the console before him. A single button gleamed under the dim emergency lights. The collapse trigger. Elias. Sarah's voice was low. We have to use it. He hesitated. The device wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It didn't explode or destroy. It erased. Anything caught in its field would simply cease. No wreckage, no remains. Just nothingness. The ethical weight crushed him. He had designed it as a deterrent, a last resort. But now, with millions of lives at stake, he had no choice. On the screen, another human warship erupted into fragments. Cities on Earth braced for bombardment. The Imperator's voice returned, taunting. Pathetic, he sneered. Your species dies today. Elias pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, reality buckled. The Zalvor fleet shimmered. Ships flickered, their massive forms blurring as though the universe itself had rejected them. One by one they vanished. No fire, no explosions. Just gone. The control room was silent. The Earth fleet hung motionless, their pilots struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Status? Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The technician's fingers flew over the console. They're not there. Not destroyed. Not retreating. Just not there. Admiral Halloway reappeared on screen, his face pale. Carter, what did you do? Elias exhaled, his hand shaking over the console. I ended the battle. Sarah turned to him, her expression unreadable. You mean you erased them? He didn't answer. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a vice. Then, another transmission came through, this time, from the Zalvor homeworld. The Imperator's face filled the screen, his mandibles twitching. He looked less like a ruler and more like an animal that had just glimpsed a predator. What have you done? His voice no longer dripped with arrogance. It trembled. Elias stared at him, feeling the shift in power. For the first time, the Zalvor weren't the hunters. He spoke, his words calm but unwavering. You shouldn't have done that. The transmission from the Imperator cut out, leaving only dead air. No gloating. No threats. Just silence. Elias Carter exhaled slowly, his fingers still hovering over the console. The room around him was motionless, every technician, officer, and scientist frozen as they processed what had just happened. An armada, one of the most powerful in the galaxy, had simply ceased to exist. Sarah Reeves was the first to speak. Her voice was low, edged with something between awe and horror. They were there. And now they're not. A quiet murmur rippled through the control center. No one cheered. No one celebrated. Admiral Holloway's face flickered back onto the screen from Earth's command station. His jaw was clenched, his expression unreadable. Tell me this was a bluff, Carter. Elias swallowed. You saw it yourself. Holloway leaned forward. The fleet's gone. Every last ship. No wreckage, no debris. Just erased. And the Zalvor. He paused. They don't know what to do. It was true. For the first time in recorded history, the Zalvor Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had no counterattack. There was no fleet to reinforce, no strategy to adapt. Just absence. Then the alarms blared. New transmission. A technician called out. It's them. The main screen flickered to life. Imperator Zalvor was back, but the confidence was gone. His mandibles twitched erratically, his compound eyes darting. His war throne, once a symbol of dominance, now seemed too large for him. His voice, when he spoke, lacked its usual venom. Humans! Explain. Elias met his gaze. The power dynamic had shifted, but the game wasn't over. If they played this wrong, they could still bring the full wrath of the Empire upon them. He chose his words carefully. We defended ourselves. Zalvor's mandibles flared. That was not defense. That was obliteration. We warned you. Sarah interjected. You didn't listen. The Imperator's claws curled around the arms of his throne. What is this weapon? Elias hesitated. Revealing too much was dangerous. But keeping them in the dark might be worse. He needed them to fear, but not to the point of reckless desperation. A deterrent, he said finally. We didn't want to use it. You forced our hand. The Imperator's breathing was shallow. You expect me to believe you will not use it again? Elias didn't blink. That depends on you. Silence. Then, without another word, the transmission cut. The tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it thickened. Sarah turned to Elias. He's scared. Yes. But scared people do stupid things. Elias nodded. The Zalvor weren't the type to back down, no matter how powerful the opponent. Their entire civilization was built on dominance. If they couldn't fight, they would find another way. A new report flashed across the control screens. A smaller Zalvor fleet had been detected at the edge of the system, scouts. They were testing the boundaries of what had happened, trying to understand the extent of humanity's power. They don't get it yet, Sarah muttered. Elias knew what was coming. They wouldn't accept ignorance. They would keep sending ships, searching for survivors, hunting for an answer. If they found nothing, their fear would turn to rage. And if they found something, anything, they would push back. We need to control the narrative, Elias said. They're trying to understand what happened. We can't let them. Sarah frowned. Meaning? We make sure they never find an answer. Admiral Holloway reappeared on the comm. We have a situation. The Zalvor are deploying scouting vessels into the remnants of their fleet's position. If they realize what happened, they'll figure out that we're not gods. Elias straightened. Give me command authorization. Holloway hesitated. Then, after a pause, he nodded. You're the one who built this thing. What do you need? Elias turned to his console. The collapsed trigger had already proven its capability. Now, it was time to use it differently. Target the scout vessels, he ordered. One by one. Slowly. Sarah's brow furrowed. You're going to make them disappear too? Yes. But not all at once. The first Zalvor scout ship vanished. Then the second. A third lasted a few minutes longer before it, too, flickered out of existence. The pattern was deliberate, erratic but calculated, as if something unseen was plucking them from reality at random. There would be no logic to decipher, no technology to analyze. Just fear. The Zalvor stopped sending scouts. A message arrived from the Imperator, short and to the point. Cease all operations. We will respond. Sarah leaned against the console, exhaling. They're reeling. They should be, Elias murmured. But he knew this wasn't over. The Imperator wouldn't let this humiliation stand. He would find another path forward. And when he did, Elias had to be ready. The Zalvor Empire did not retreat. They did not beg. They adapted. Elias Carter stared at the latest intelligence report, his stomach twisting. A new fleet was mobilizing, 10 times the size of the one he had erased. Their battleships, once symbols of unshakable confidence, were now arranged in tight, paranoid formations. They weren't just coming to conquer. They were coming to understand. They think it's a trick, Sarah Reeves muttered beside him. Her gaze was locked on the display, where the fleet's formations pulsed like a tightening fist. They don't believe what happened. They can't, Elias said. Because if they do, it means their entire way of life is meaningless. The Zalvor ruled through fear. But now, for the first time, they had encountered something they feared. And instead of running, they were about to test it. A priority transmission flickered onto the main screen. Imperator Zalvor appeared, his mandibles twitching. The terror in his eyes was still there, but now, it simmered beneath something else, calculated defiance. Humans, he hissed. We acknowledge your power. But we do not believe in ghosts. Elias said nothing. Zalvor leaned forward. We come with a force beyond reckoning. If you can do what you claim, prove it. If not, we will burn your worlds to dust. The transmission cut. For a long moment, the control room was silent. Then Admiral Holloway's voice crackled over the comms. He's calling our bluff. Sarah exhaled sharply. He thinks we use some kind of experimental weapon, not a repeatable technology. He's gambling that we can't do it again. Elias sat down slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had expected retaliation, but not this fast. The Imperator wasn't giving them time to strategize. We can do it again, Sarah said. So we just press the button. Elias shook his head. No. Not yet. She frowned. Elias, if we wait, they'll overwhelm us. He didn't look at her. Instead, he turned to the intelligence officer monitoring the fleet's movements. What do we know about their internal politics? The officer blinked, caught off guard. What? Do they have opposition? Factions? Dissent? The officer hesitated, then started pulling up classified reports. The Imperator's rule is absolute, but there's been resistance. A splinter faction. Political radicals, mostly. No real power. Elias leaned forward. Give me a name. The officer scrolled, then stopped. High Chancellor Vorketh. Exiled years ago. He leads a movement that believes the Empire has become stagnant. Advocates for reform, diplomacy. The Imperator nearly had him executed, but he fled to the fringes of the Empire. Elias tapped the console. Find him. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You want to negotiate? I want an option that doesn't end with us pressing that button until there's no one left to fight. Minutes passed in tense silence as the intelligence team worked. Then, finally, we have a signal. The screen flickered, and a new figure appeared. Vorketh. His skin was paler than the Imperator's, his mandibles shorter, his expression sharp with cautious curiosity. You are human, he said, studying Elias. And you are either brilliant or desperate to contact me. Elias folded his arms. Both. Vorketh chittered in amusement. Then speak. Elias didn't waste time. Your Imperator is sending a fleet to Earth. If they arrive, we will erase them. All of them. Vorketh's amusement vanished. His gaze sharpened. You are not bluffing. No. A long silence. Then Vorketh exhaled, thoughtful. If what you say is true, the Empire's fate is already sealed. If you use this power again, their fear will turn to madness. They will throw everything at you until the stars themselves burn out. Elias nodded. That's why I need your help. Vorketh leaned back, mandibles clicking. You want a coup? I want the war to end. Sarah crossed her arms. And you want power? Let's not pretend otherwise. The alien let out a dry hiss of laughter. Ambition is universal. Elias leaned forward. If you overthrow the Imperator, the war stops. The Empire survives, but under leadership that understands what's at stake. Vorketha's gaze flicked away, calculating. Then he sighed. Even if I agreed, I do not have an army. Elias's lips curled into a grim smile. Yes, you do. He turned to Admiral Holloway. How fast can we broadcast a message to every Zalvor world? Holloway raised a brow. Depends. What message? Elias met Vorketha's gaze. Your rebellion just gained human support. We will spread the truth. The Imperator led them into a war against a force that erased his fleet from existence. We'll let them see his fear. Vorketha's mandibles twitched in understanding. You wish to turn his empire against him? Yes. Sarah exhaled. That's bold. It's our only real chance, Elias said. Vorketh was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well, human. Let us break an empire. The transmission ended. Holloway let out a slow breath. You realize this could backfire spectacularly. Elias nodded. It's better than the alternative. Sarah crossed her arms. And if it doesn't work? Elias's gaze drifted back to the button. The final option. The end game. Then we press it. The galaxy trembled. Elias Carter stood in Luna Base's command center, watching as the Zalvor Empire tore itself apart. Transmission after transmission flooded in, rebellions erupting on core worlds, loyalist forces clashing with defectors, entire fleets refusing to follow orders. High Chancellor Vorketha's forces had gone from scattered dissidents to a full-scale revolution overnight. It had worked. Sarah Reeves paced behind him, arms crossed, her expression tight. The Imperator's losing control. Admiral Holloway's voice crackled over the comms. His fleet's still coming. Even with everything collapsing around him, he's not backing down. Elias exhaled. He wasn't surprised. Zalvor had built his empire on strength, on the idea that the Zalvor species was superior. Admitting defeat wasn't just political suicide, it was unthinkable. A new transmission appeared. Not from the Imperator but from Vorketh. The exiled Chancellor's mandibles twitched in something close to satisfaction. It is done! Elias met his gaze. He's still coming. Vorketh inclined his head. I know. But he will not reach you. Elias frowned. What do you mean? Vorketh stepped aside, revealing another figure behind him, a Zalvor general, armored in ceremonial battleplating. The alien warrior saluted Elias, then spoke in a clipped, deliberate tone. I was once the Imperator's most trusted commander, the general said. Now I see his madness. Elias didn't need more explanation. You're turning your fleet against him. The general nodded. Even a god cannot rule from the grave. Sarah let out a slow breath. So the Imperator's fleet is walking into an ambush. Vorketha's mandibles twitched in amusement. Fitting, isn't it? Elias stared at the display. Dozens of Zalvor warships, ships meant to conquer Earth, were now flagged as hostile, within their own empire. The Imperator had led them into battle, expecting fear to keep them in line. But fear was a fragile thing. Once shattered, it turned to something else entirely. Holloway's voice cut in. Carter! We're picking up movement. Elias turned back to the control screens. The Imperator's fleet had arrived at the edge of the system. But something was wrong. They're firing on each other? Sarah whispered. The warships had broken formation. Some still pushed forward toward Earth, but others turned on their former allies, unleashing devastating barrages of plasma and kinetic rounds. It was chaos. The Imperator's face appeared on the main display, his composed arrogance now gone. His mandibles flared, his breathing ragged. Humans! He spat, fury barely contained. You did this! Elias met his gaze calm. You did this! The Imperator's eyes burned with hatred. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? Look around you, Sarah said coldly. Your empire is crumbling. The Zalvor ruler bared his fangs. I am the empire. Elias shook his head. Not anymore. The Imperator's image flickered as another explosion rocked his flagship. Someone on his bridge shouted in the background. Warning klaxons blared. He turned his gaze back to Elias, and in that moment, something shifted. The rage was still there, but beneath it, realization. He had already lost. The screen went dark. Elias turned to the status reports. The Imperator's flagship was taking heavy fire from his own forces. His command fleet, once the pride of the Zalvor, was being ripped apart. Some ships surrendered outright. Others tried to flee. A few continued to charge toward Earth, desperate for some final act of vengeance. Elias didn't give them the chance. His fingers hovered over the console, the same button he had pressed before. The collapsed trigger. Sarah watched him carefully. Are you sure? Elias didn't hesitate. He pressed it. In an instant, the remaining attackers vanished. No wreckage, no last desperate shots. Just empty space where they had been. The battle was over. A long silence stretched across the control room. Then a message appeared. Vorketh. The Imperator is dead, he said simply. His rule ends here. Elias exhaled. And the Empire? Vorketh studied him. It survives changed. Sarah frowned. Changed how? Vorketh's mandibles twitched. That remains to be seen. But this war is finished. You have my word. Elias didn't trust him, not fully. But for now, it was enough. Holloway's voice crackled in. Carter! The fleet's standing down. We won. Elias leaned back, letting the weight of it all settle. They had faced annihilation. The galaxy had expected humanity to fall. Instead, they had pressed a button. And the Empire had disappeared.